Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar, How to Run Usability Tests In-House. I'm Ryan from Userlytics, the premier user testing platform to help you scale your research affordably. Today, I'm very excited to have special guest John Sag from Userlytics on our webinar. John is a senior researcher on our team with many years of experience creating research studies, analyzing results, and delivering insightful reports to many of our clients. And today, John will be talking about how you can test and improve your internal applications and onboard B2B participants to your studies. Just before we get going, I've got some quick technical stuff for you. First off, start putting your questions into the question section now. I'll see them, I'll keep track of them, and get them to John during the Q&A portion of the webinar. I might sprinkle in a few questions in the middle of the webinar, but most will be saved for the end. The sooner you get your questions in, however, the more likely we are to answer them during the webinar, so try and get them in a little quick. Also, in the chat section, in just a minute, you'll see I'm about to play some Zoom support pages. If you're having problems with the audio or general issues whatsoever, just click on those links and follow the instructions there. If you need some additional support, I'll work with you in the chat section as well to help you out. So with all that wrapped up, John, how are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. And hope you guys can hear me okay. I really appreciate everyone being here. Internal usability, in-house type stuff is something that's near and dear to my heart. My name is John. I'm a UX analyst here at Userlytics, and coming to you remote from my house, as well as I'm sure many of you are remote from your homes as well. I'm working on internal UX and sort of B2B UX type projects for many, many years now. And I know some of the challenges that are around that space, and I'm glad we're going to be able to talk to that today. So I wanted to start a discussion by just kind of discussing sort of the inherent differences that we all experience between, consumer-facing and customer-facing software and the internal software, right? Because, in reality, we all know that internal apps are usually some of the last in the organization to get much design and usability resources. But often these are mission-critical applications that our colleagues and people in other companies are using that drive significant productivity and profitability in an enterprise. So these are not, unimportant pieces of software. These are super critical. I know they're not necessarily, driving double-digit revenue on the product side or the sales side, but these can make or break an organization in some cases, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And the reality is, consumer and client-facing software usually pretty well studied, usually pretty well designed. These companies devote their main design and UX resources to putting out the best product possible, right? This kind of stuff is tied directly to company or product value and their growth. This stuff is really important. A lot of these companies live or die by providing good user experiences. And I'm hoping that we can start to transform, internal stakeholders, leadership in these companies to understand that as important as good UX is in these circumstances, it's also really, really important in internal circumstances as well, right? Because we've all seen that our internal applications, sometimes despite our best, tries, often get few, if any, design or user research resources compared to the rest of the organization. A lot of these applications obviously are very technical. It's not uncommon for the person who developed the app to also be essentially the default designer of the application, not naming any names or calling out any particular application suites that are out there. But they're often focused on providing features, not always a good user experience. We have made some strides in those areas in internal applications over the years, and obviously some of those applications, I'm not going to name them again, but you'll know what they are. Those are the ones that tend to be leading in a particular industry or area, right? Those are the ones that tend to be most utilized. And that's great too. I mean, to them, that's their product. So they have to be designing those things really, really well. But it's still an internal tool that requires some resources from the company that's adopting it to make it great. And a lot of this type of software has a mixture of new and legacy content and design paradigms and buttons and features, and there's all this kind of stuff that needs to get addressed. And our colleagues, your colleagues, my colleagues, we're wasting precious hours of our weeks, often dealing with inefficient tools that are suffering from some of the very same simple design deficiencies that we have addressed in our client products or our consumer facing products. These are things that there are learnings out there, there are best practices out there that just need to be applied to these, as long as someone's out there to ask the right questions and to push the development team in the right way. So I wanted to just bring up this quote from Jim Ross, who's a senior UX analyst at AnswerLab. He summed it up really, really well. The experience employees have with their tools can greatly impact their job satisfaction. Employees today can spend a large part of their time using technology, such as software and web applications, to accomplish their work. Those systems can either be easy to use, efficient, and helpful in performing tasks, or they become difficult to learn, cumbersome, inefficient, and unhelpful in accomplishing those tasks. And there are a lot of companies that have experienced this problem in the past. It's a little hard to nail down a global, across all enterprises sort of statistic on how pervasive bad UX is in internal applications and B2B applications. But we know it's out there. We know it when we see it. But what we can find is some examples, and obviously companies don't want to advertise when they've had huge failures. But we have seen examples of companies really perhaps not taking UX and user research to the degree that they should have in developing their internal tools, and really paying the price for that in the long run. An example of that is a company you've probably heard of called Avon. I'm not calling them out specifically. They're, just as one example, sort of a cautionary tale. Their story was out there in the Wall Street Journal and a few other places discussing this sort of problem that they had a few years ago, where they spent 4 years developing an internal, what do they call it? An internal order management system with SAP. So they spent many years working on this application, trying to modernize their infrastructure and better enable their sales personnel to really get out there and put orders in and get things quickly. And they had this whole grand vision for it, right? And the rollout, as I mentioned, took 4 years. They brought it out to a pilot group in Canada the last year of that development time, and it was a complete disaster. The software was difficult to use, it was cumbersome, it was frustrating. In fact, a lot of their frontline sales associates that they put this software in front of as, hey, this is your new tool, this is what you're using, they ended up quitting in frustration. They were so disgusted in what was going on, and they had such difficulty in getting sales put through the order system and everything that they experienced that they quit. And this cost Avon way more than just some salespeople. They actually took a write-down of $125 million that year, and they basically scrapped the entire project. So that's obviously a big disaster for them. I'm sure they have since recovered. This was several years ago, but just an example of a program, a process, a project really starting in the intention of improving some core piece of the business is really important aspect of what they do. And without asking the right questions, without designing things the right way, they should have seen, in theory, the problems that these pilot group of people discovered in Canada well before it was 4 years into their project and they were ready to launch, right? So hopefully we prevent another company from making such a costly mistake. And obviously, a lot of workers are remote now, right? We all have our kids in our laps, they're touching our mice. It's a struggle for everyone, right? So point is, our reliance on easily accessible and well-designed tools is obviously higher than ever, because we're all in our homes, working from home. Some companies have been shifted entirely to work home-based workforces, and they just need the ability to be able to understand their experience, use their tools very effectively, because we've lost that ability to sit shoulder to shoulder with somebody else who works in our same group and ask for help or ask for tips or know where that link is or know where to go for that particular piece of the software that we need to use to do our jobs. It's become much more of a challenge. So let's delve into that a little bit. Let's talk about running internal user studies and some of the challenges and advantages that you have while you're doing that. So this is true for both B2B participants and employees at your own company, right? You have software and infrastructure challenges, right? VPN restrictions on applications or systems that can only be accessed behind a virtual private network or a firewall. Maybe it's a corporate firewall with tunneling software. Also security restrictions, right? A lot of companies are going to multi-factor authentication, least the the model of least access. So you need to have permission to access certain kinds of applications, or have, even within the application, access to certain areas of the application. Those are areas you might want to test, right? So these are all issues that you'll have to address when you're going through this process. And obviously, from the part of the user experience team, the designers, the product managers, the product owners, there may be a lack of knowledge, expertise, or access in these tools, or the functions or processes these tools are meant to aid with, to help with, to improve even. So that's a bit of a hurdle we have to get over. There may be limited or no leadership buy-in to even do some of this work. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, internal applications, internal tools and processes don't get the same amount of attention from designers and, some of those resources, the UX resources that the consumer-facing or client-facing products would, right? And we also have conflicting processes and priorities. How often have you heard that, different parts of your companies are in silos, and they do agile over there, but they do waterfall over here, and this team works on this particular process, and this team does a different thing, and there's a different whole group of people over here that do the similar job, not the same job as the folks over on that side. So these are all challenges, again, that we are trying to overcome in doing what we're doing. There's also a ton of advantages to trying to run usability studies and user research studies within the B2B participant groups and also the employees at our own company. So reach, we have a ready pool of participants with a vested interest, right? And these sorts of tools that we're going to be working with can easily reach across borders. They can easily reach across company networks to reach the participants that not only are ready and willing to help you, but really, they have that vested interest. They have, if this is improved for them, if they can provide that feedback, then they are getting a benefit directly out of the work that they're putting into it. We have scalability, right? Everything, you can scale these research efforts out as far as you want to, as many participants as you want to include, as many different methodologies as you want to include, and all that stuff gets digitized into a platform like Userlytics, and you get to evaluate all that data, right? In the poll, you said, the speeding up of the evaluation of data, it really helps if all that data is in the same platform, and you can see the graphs and charts and pull clips of different things out very easily. And obviously the cost and time, remote tests are cheaper and faster to organize than trying to do moderated tests. And the participants are essentially free. And I put free in quotes because, obviously not everyone's going to want to give a lot of their time. You may have to, grease some palms to get some help from different groups, but, you don't necessarily have to pay them the way you would traditional participants in a usability study. And part of that is also because of that vested interest, right? They want to help. They're happy to take a few minutes out of their day to help a team that's going to be improving a tool that they're going to use. And the availability, right? They're way more willing to participate because it requires a lot less effort when you use some of these more advanced usability tools. There is a wide range of methodologies at your disposal. With our platform, we have all kinds of things like card sorts and tree tests, moderated and unmoderated studies, all sorts of methodologies that you can put in place, different kinds of scales and rating systems that you can put into your surveys. And doing all these organizations to promote UX in a great way. So you're putting front and center in front of those important stakeholders, in front of those key leadership people, that this sort of stuff is going on internally in your company, and you're seeing the fruits of your labor, that you are seeing they are seeing the benefits firsthand of you improving an application or improving an experience for a great number of associates or employees. You can even I've seen companies hold what they call usability days, where they, this is a bit more in the olden times where we used to see each other face to face, but you can even do this remotely now. You can hold usability days where people get together and talk about their experience of revamping an internal piece of software, an application, play some videos that show people struggling with something in one hand, and then seeing an improvement in the later revision of that software. Put those things together to promote that culture within your company, that UX is worthwhile within your internal audiences, and that will reap tremendous benefits. It will start to become ingrained in the ethos of the company. So I wanted to review some of the types of testing. moderated and unmoderated, some of the methods and methodologies that we have at our disposal when we talk about working with those internal groups. So the first thing is unmoderated testing. That is a great source of quantitative data. Large groups of people that you want to get, put time on task and those sorts of things together for them. It's very fast, easy to launch, especially with a platform like Userlytics. Again, it makes it very easy. Spend like a couple hours putting it together. It's inexpensive, right? Again, for all the reasons we mentioned earlier. It's very scalable, so you can expand this out to any number of associates, or you can move it to different associate or employee groups as you need to. You want to test with one department first and then move on to another group of people who use the software in a different way or use the platform in a different way. You can do that very easily, and you can iterate quickly too, right? You can get that using a modern platform. You can get that data back. You can bring that back to your Scrum meetings. You can bring that back to your developer huddles, and you can talk about what you've learned just from those brief interactions you've had already, and get those changes made in later iterations of the application or later updates to the system, and see the immediate benefits of those right away. Right, and we also have moderated sessions that you can run. These are great for the initial stages. Focus groups and in-depth interviews, gathering that qualitative feedback gives you a lot of time for discovery, right? It's more flexible. So if something is changing in your application, or people are experiencing or running into pain points in ways that you hadn't anticipated, you can adjust, right? I put here adaptable, adjust on the fly. You can adjust and adapt on the fly to those changes. You can change up your script later on down the line and gather more data in that exploratory fashion. So some of the methods and methodologies you can use in these, right? Unmoderated is great for time on task, for pass-fail type tasks, running surveys, card sorts, tree tests where you can put various items and categories in front of people, and card sorts great for understanding users' mental model and really putting like things together. And then the tree test is great for testing some of those theories. We've seen tree tests used a lot for navigation. I want to create new navigation or information architecture in my application, and I can use a tree test to make sure that the categories and the titles and the labels and things that I'm creating in my system make sense to people before they even see it. And that's very iterative and very quick. And you can also do A/B testing. This sort of blends the definition of what usability testing is, but A/B testing is a great methodology just to use to say, I'm just going to show this group this portion, this other group this portion, and let's see who ends up running into errors more often, or who takes longer to complete a task. Those are great things you can do with those unmoderated sessions. On the moderated side, great opportunity for those in-depth interviews. I cannot stress enough how great these are and how important they are. Great for discovery sessions. This is more answering, that why question versus the what. We know that they're having issues. We know what they're doing in our software, because we have analytics and we have metrics. We don't know why. So this is where we answer those why questions. You can also do it with focus groups. I jump back up a couple points in the bullets here, but you can also do it with focus groups and kind of understand how groups of people are using these applications as well. This is great for first click testing, just seeing where people go first for something in your application. They can walk you through how they're using something, and you can see where they're going first. Are they going to navigation first? Are they going to search first? If they're completing a certain task, where is their first sort of instinct taking them? And then flexibility to adapt again, because you're doing moderated, because this is a live conversation with somebody. They have a lot of flexibility. You can change things up. You can start to investigate a particular area of concern for a person, or start to ask those questions as you move on. So there really is three that I wanted to go over, sorts of tests that we can focus on. So the first is explorative. These are really those open-ended tests that are getting to the heart of opinions and feedback on concepts and ideas with our users, right? These are great for the beginning stages. This is typically, early in the stages of product development, helping researchers pinpoint, either gaps in the marketplace, gaps in the product itself, identify, potential new features that you might want to explore, and definitely workshop new ideas. Then we get into assessment research. That's typically used to test a user satisfaction with a product and how well they are able to use it, how easy it is to use. Also, you can evaluate the product's general functionality and find problems in that design. So you've already, put code to screen, and now you're seeing if that stuff is panning out the way you expected it to. You also have comparative types of tests. So you can compare to two different solutions. You can compare something that your company is developing to what a competitor has out in the marketplace. And you can even do it, as I mentioned before, between two different versions. You can ask your users what they prefer when they're using one or the other. Compare a website with its primary competitor, compare one app against another app and how easy they are to use. There's a lot of options, but this is sort of how the different types of testing break down. But explorative is definitely the one you want to start with. So let's talk about developing a plan and where you want to begin. So here are some questions to ask as you're getting this group together to better understand and define sort of what your goals and your tasks are going to be. And this applies to internal applications, in-house apps, stuff that you custom design for specific purposes, and also for those internal applications, stuff that's B2B or things you've bought third-party SaaS solutions that you've purchased for internal use. First, the availability. Who in your company has access to this application, and what business goals is it aligned to? This feels very fundamental, but it really is important to document these things. This is typically where the sort of the working group or the steering committee or the work stream starts to define internally, what they're going to be testing and answer some of these foundational questions. Adaptability. What flexibility does the company require from this software? Is it that it's only going to be used by internal associates and not frontline sales, or is it going to be used by everyone in the company? Does it need to bend and conform to different use cases? Is it going to function one way for people who are in a store and another way for people who are out on the road doing sales? Those sorts of questions are what you have to figure out when you're starting to plan these sorts of things. Security, obviously really important, right? You have to understand what the company's data protection requirements are, any hurdles that are going to be involved with your application and testing in terms of security. Is VPN required? Is it not required? Do they need some certain amount of access to the application? Is that handled through some sort of a third-party system like Okta or some other authentication method? And you really have to document that information. And obviously the usability, right? What about the usability and user experience of the software that's already being used? Have there been previous studies or tests done about this software? Is there anything that the company that created this software has done already, and they've sort of done their homework in some of these things, or they have issues that they've identified that they wanted to address? Great to see product roadmaps in this circumstance. If you have a third-party application, or even the team that has developed this internally, what do they have documented in terms of the usability of the application? And what they'd like to address in terms of pain points and problems with it. So next, we're going to drop a plan. This is really where the steps come in. Get your internal teams sort of aligned on the goals and benefits of what you're doing, right? Identify the target audience. Who, from that previous question I showed you, who is the target audience for your design efforts, for your redesign efforts, for your user experience efforts? Understand the development team's processes and schedules. This is critical. I can't speak enough about this because you can have your own process in place for how you do UXR. You can have your own product development and improvement kind of cycles internally, but if you're not able to sync up with the development team and you're trying to get time on their calendar while they're already in the middle of the sprint building this part of the application that you're supposed to be studying, you guys are going to be out of sync, and it's going to be a lot of going back and fixing things that should have been addressed earlier. So meet with them and understand, hey, you guys are in a sprint. Is it a 1-week sprint? Is it a 2-week sprint? When do you start these things? When's your sprint planning meetings? When do you guys get together to decide new features? How can my design and UXR efforts, work their way into your development process? Because they're not going to necessarily be able to easily change their development process. What you can do is find opportunities to be included in those efforts. And get meetings together where you're having everyone aligned to the study's goals. This is important for everyone to have, all the stakeholders, developers, product managers, scrum masters, all of them, to get aligned on what you're trying to accomplish with your user testing plans. Make sure they understand the goals of the project. Make sure they agree on the goals of the project, right? You'll have these conversations and you'll find out, someone thought this is about reducing the size of the application and making it more focused and concentrated in a particular area. And the product owner thought this was expanding the application's capabilities and just adding a new audience to using it. So sometimes these teams don't even talk to each other, even though they're in the same development meetings together, because they're all focused on just building out this one little thing in the application. They're not necessarily talking about always the larger goal. And then this is where you can bring in the understanding of the user journey, start doing journey mapping, start having those conversations, start planning those conversations, and understanding what the pitfalls are now. And this information can even come from complaints and help desk tickets and things that you already know exist out there, because people are pretty verbal about their problems as they're having them. And then finally, just make sure that in your conversations, you're really focusing on the benefits. Make everyone really aware, especially leadership people, of what the benefits of your work are going to be. Increase productivity, increase retention in the company, and really how this is hopefully going to affect the bottom line. So this is where we're going to prepare our study. This is where we're really going to take these steps to get ready for our meetings, and within the work stream that you're going to be running, generate the questions with the stakeholders, understand what they want to know about the usability of the application or the platform that you're on. Next, determine your key goals of the application and the study that you're running, and write some of those user stories. Understand, the user being this kind of person is looking to accomplish, X, Y, Z for this reason. You probably have seen those user stories format before. Next, you can create that setback schedule. This is really helpful for you once you understand the development process that the team is on. Say they're probably already working on a pretty insane timeline to get something out the door or get some MVP created. So understand where they're going to be ending, where they're going to be finished, and then work back from there and create that setback schedule of who you need to talk to, what meetings you need to have, and what user research methods and activities you already need to have planned or in the pipeline by the time that schedule ends. This will help you tremendously as you plan week to week for what you need to get accomplished. Gather those assets to be tested. This is also that in that preparation phase where you're going to get some designers and UX researchers in the team, some time with some of the lead developers in the group, hopefully access to some of these systems so you can see them for yourself, grab screenshots, start to write out your scripts and some of the thoughts around the experience, maybe even have a few of those quick aha moments like, guys, you can't make a gray button in the middle of a slightly darker gray background because no one's going to see it. You can give them some of those early helpful tips as you're working through. So get those assets together. And then write your interview script, your moderated session guide. I really urge you to have those initial interview conversations with people. Those are really, really helpful. So write down that quick interview script of questions you want to ask, key points you want to hit from those questions from your stakeholders, right? From those key goals and user stories that you created earlier on. You're going to have those things help develop your interview script. And then also to start to develop those tasks that you're going to have your users go through when they're using either the old system or the new system, so you understand what they're going to have to do. And this is where you're really going to sort of benchmark. You could benchmark where things are and then benchmark the improvements you're going to make down the line. And finally, you're going to start, after all those things are done, recruiting to find your participants. And this is going to be probably the most fun of the whole. It's in focus group places. People who are going to take the time to answer a survey about how they're using a system or an application are going to be the first ones that are going to be willing to take part in some of your additional user research efforts. Also from tech pilot groups, a lot of companies have these. Maybe even the B2B company that you work with has a tech pilot group. These are people who are like early adopters, right? Really interested in technology, and they're always willing to help you. As long as you understand with the caveat that when you talk to these groups, these are people who are a little more tech savvy, most likely than your average user. So just keep those folks in mind. They will definitely help you find some very easy and obvious pain points, maybe not obvious to you, but obvious to people who start to use your application who are not involved in developing it. And as I mentioned, heavy users, early adopters of platforms like yours people who use it quite often or who are among the first users in the system are obviously great users to reach out to, because they tend to be your advocates. They tend to be the people who are most familiar with that piece of software, that platform, and they're probably among the more willing to help. People who don't use it quite as often or hardly at all will probably give you answers like, "Oh, I don't really use it, so I don't really know how much help I can be." Even though in reality, they can be a lot of help, because maybe they don't use it a lot because it's super frustrating to use, or maybe they don't use it a lot because they found other ways around using this piece of software or this platform, so they don't have to subject themselves to it over and over again. So those are great people to also recruit and to try and find those individuals, just like the heavy users, and then launch your tests. That's going to be the next phase of that process. Once you've put everything together and you've recruited your participants, is you launch your test in a platform like Userlytics. So we're going to try some things. We're going to go through. I'm going to toss it to my friend Ryan, and show you sort of how Userlytics has developed the method to get around a lot of those challenges we talked about earlier, with access and VPN and security restrictions and those sorts of things. We just wanted to develop a way that people could utilize these tools and still provide a lot of value in those conversations and gathering that data without having to jump through a ton of hoops. So Ryan, I'll let you take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. If you can stop sharing your screen, I'll go ahead and share mine for 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And John, if you can let me know when you can see my screen.
I sure can.
Fantastic. So yeah, here at Userlytics, we do have a no download capability that's just as easy as sending a link to any one of the participants you may want to invite. And this is the Userlytics dashboard. As you can see, we have the studies that are sitting here, different items on the left-hand side, like user admin, completed tests, anything like that. I'm just going to go into one of these results. No download is what I have it called. And we can see this study is running. It has 1 of 5 users. Let's say, as John was pointing out, we finally went through and we got one of our heavy users or one of our early adopters who agreed to run this test with us. So we can just come over here very easily, click inside of it, go to collect responses, and here's this easy and simple link that you can copy and send to as many people as you want. So you can send it off to the next 4 or 40 or 400, doesn't matter. And then the first 5 people to come in and take the test will be able to do so. So I can just pass this link to any one of my testers that I may want, and all they would have to do is put in their name, and then they can put in their email if they want, but they don't have to. That's not required. And then they hit accept and then continue. At this stage, there's just 3 simple instruction pages. So we can see this first one, basic steps. This next one, more basic steps, and saying there's no right or wrong answers kind of going on. And finally, this last one, in order to better conduct this study, we'll need to record the session, send an image on your camera, just really light instructions. And then at this point, they actually get taken to a configuration. And this configuration is just making sure that their audio is working, their video is working, everything is working. As you can see here, internet connectivity, all the kind of stuff that you would expect are all working and everything's fine. It takes about 20 or 30 seconds. Unfortunately, I can't show this to you because right now Zoom has the priority for webcam and Zoom is using the audio, so there's not a way that I can show this configuration. But as soon as the configuration is done, the user gets this exact same page. It just basically says, press here to start right in the middle of the page, and then they actually go through and start with the session. And due to this no download capability, it's super easy just to invite whoever you want, whenever you want. And to actually show you what a result looks like, just so y'all can get the full view of what this is, this would be a session. So immediately after, when a user says, start test and get taken into the test, this is what they come to. And this is a session I did just about a week ago. So you'll see me kind of interacting with all this. I do have it muted, but you will be able to listen to the user as they go through. And here you can see this user's, or me, is just reading the first task right here. Once I hit the first task, it's just a reminder, please come back to this tab. The way that our system works is it's done in several tabs. So here in just a second, you'll see I'm going to be directed to the Spotify. There you go. So I'm now on Spotify. And I can go back and forth to the tabs whenever I want, reading the instructions, kind of following the test however I want, or otherwise you can see at the end of the test there's a series of questions I can go through and answer. And this test is partially in English and partially in Spanish, but you can be typing up questions in any language you want. Our recorder is in about, I think, 20 or 22 languages right about now, and we could add in more languages for you as well if you have testing or participants in other languages you want to be doing testing in. So that would just basically be the result. Then once the result makes it to the dashboard, it takes just about a minute to upload. You can see things on the right-hand side like the tasks. You can create annotations. You can look at metrics, highlight reels, all kinds of good stuff to really help you analyze the result a lot faster. And the last thing I'll just show you real quick is we do have this exact same capability, but for moderated as well. And this is the exact same setup, the exact same number of little pages before a user gets started, the exact same URL, everything that would be working. Only a few little differences here, of course, that the moderator and the participant would be communicating. The audio would be the dialogue between the moderator and the participant, not just the participant's voice. And then the instructions will be here on one tab, and then any number of activities or digital assets that need to be looked at can all be done in several tabs as the conversation and moderated session moves forward. So that's a pretty light introduction to how you can invite testers and what the tester goes through and the experience for the tester and maybe the tester and the moderator together here at the Userlytics platform. So if you have any questions about this, we can answer them at the end of the study, I'm sorry, at the end of the webinar. But I think at this point, it'd be good, John, for me to pass it back to you.
Sounds great, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen again. So in conclusion, as we wrap up the webinar and get ready for the question and answers, I just want to say, Give Good UX is a group that is actually called that too. So kudos to them for that good name. Internal UXR is just as important as other research efforts in the organization. That's really something that you have to internalize and feel is important to you, right? And obviously improved usability increases employee productivity, reduces the stress, and frustration that people feel throughout their day. And in the case of Avon, and I'm sure many other companies, it could potentially save you millions of dollars in wasted design and development efforts, and vendor contracts that end up turning into something that's not usable. So make your UXR plan. Create that setback schedule. Choose the best methodologies and methods for what your needs are. Plan those surveys, those one-on-one user interviews, and the tasks aligned to the questions and goals that your stakeholders and you have developed. Guide them through that. And then obviously recruit, leverage your internal resources and close partners, generate that buy-in among key leadership, get them involved in the process too, invite them to user interview sessions. They will see firsthand, how helpful those things are. And work to recruit those participants that match your target audience as closely as possible, because most likely that target audience is the people within your company. And then leverage the best tools like Userlytics that provide flexibility and adaptability while offering those critical insights, right? This is all around growing the UX practice in your own organization. These kinds of tools help you to do that. It's really hard to do it without any good tools. You end up just doing a lot of stuff manually, and it's hard to show that stuff off when you have those conversations. But with the right tools in your pocket, it becomes much, much easier. So we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Fantastic. We had one question come in the question and answer. We had one question come in the chat, and two questions come in for participants who weren't able to attend. They came in through email a little bit earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and start with April's question. I think it came in first. I'll just read this off to you. It looks like she is like the only designer, the only researcher at her company.
Oh boy. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. So I'd love suggestions on how to efficiently run studies and establish good practices as the single UX resource across several projects and in several stages of design and development. I'm also the UI designer for the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, John, if you want to field that question, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. So April, I feel your pain. I understand where you're coming from. As much as that feels like a hindrance because of how much you have to accomplish, and I know you are probably staring at your screen at home and shaking your fist in frustration because you see all the problems and it's really hard to get everyone to understand them. There is also an opportunity here for you because you are embedded as the UI designer. So you have some of the capability to sort of put the brakes on things when you feel like they're getting a little out of control. Because you are basically the sole design person, you can pressure, may be a bad word, but advocate for some of those good practices on your own, on behalf of work with the scrum master, whoever's running the development sprints, to get some of even the most basic UXR activities involved. If that involves you just like setting time aside on your own whenever you have some free time to have interviews and conversations with some of the users that use this application, talk to the product owners and find out who they are and just say, hey, I have some questions or I have some ideas I want to run past people that are using the application now, and invite them along. They can be participants and observers of your conversations. If you can easily develop some pretty good interview scripts. You can even look for them online and just you only need a half an hour with somebody just to have them share their screen with you, have a little conversation like we're having right now, and just have them go through their experience with the software, the application. Record it, like if you have in your company like a WebEx or a Teams or Google Meet or something, you can record the session. If you have an extra 20 minutes, you can pull out maybe a really good clip or example of someone having a really tough time with a particular piece of software that you're in the middle of developing. And you can show that in your next meeting. Say, hey, I was just having some conversations with some folks, and I saw a pattern emerge with a few of the people I spoke to. And here's a video showing somebody, not really understanding something that we're working on right now. And that kind of stuff is extremely powerful. It's one thing to describe these things in conversations and try and advocate for them. It's another to watch someone is going to be using your application in 6 months or 3 months or a year, struggling through something that you think is a great idea. It's a very humbling experience for people who are involved in these applications. So I have seen many an attitude shift very dramatically and very suddenly when they see someone really struggling with something that they're working on. It's a very humbling experience, as I mentioned. So I hope that answers your question, April. I would just do what, UX researchers have kind of coined the term of guerrilla research, where you're just kind of grabbing people and having them just spend a little bit of time with you, answering some questions and taking you through their experience. That kind of stuff is eye-opening. I would invite as many people from your product groups, your development groups to kind of watch these videos, even if it's after the fact. And just say, hey, here's what I found from just talking to sometimes it's just 2 or 3 people. Sometimes it's just one, to be honest with you. And you can really, open some eyes in a big way. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And April, I know you've left the session today. It looks like you had to leave just a few minutes ago. When you're watching this recording, if you do have any follow-up questions on this, and same goes to everyone here, just email ux@userlytics.com, and we'd be more than happy to help you out. Fantastic. So moving on to the next question, we have another senior researcher here, Tan, and I'd like to ask this question to you, Tan. This came from Anonymous, and it does have a few parts to it, so I'll kind of read it all out, but then hopefully you can kind of dive in and we can go through each of these parts individually. So a question about costs and incentives to participants. What are the recommended incentives for unmoderated testing? What about for moderated? How much do you recommend bumping up that incentive if there's a quick turnaround and we want to fill our study quickly? Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely varies depending on your study. Typically, incentives for moderated tests are a little bit higher than unmoderated tests. And I would say our base price is around $20 for the session, but that can obviously go up, especially if the study is a longer duration, or you're looking for a particular profile that is more difficult to recruit for, in which case we would bump up that incentive to increase the likelihood of finding someone to complete the study in a timely manner. I would say for the most part, though, we don't often run into issues with recruitment and filling those slots. But it does happen, and our operations team is really good about finding that right number and getting the invitation sent out to the right people to make sure that the slots are filled up. And just to touch on something that John mentioned earlier, if you're doing studies internally, your participants are people within your company. The incentive might not need to be as high as if you were to recruit externally, right? Because again, these employees within the company are motivated, they're invested in the development of the system. So in all likelihood, they would be more than happy to contribute and provide feedback with little or no incentive. But yeah, I think that ultimately comes down to what your budget is and what the expectations are within your company.
Yeah, I would add to that to say that, for internal associates especially, I don't think there's an expectation of any incentive when they're taking part in your usability research efforts. I mean, you're all there doing jobs to support the company. So this is sort of, I think, viewed in the same vein. Um, with B2B and those sorts of things, if budgets are a constraint, you can kind of get a little creative. Maybe the sales team is willing to offer, companies that are helping, or people that are helping within those companies, like say discounts and additional support or something along those lines. So you can kind of get pretty creative.
Yeah, actually, if we can just stay here and dive in a little bit deeper, Jenny asked a question before the webinar started. She was unable to attend today, but this is kind of like the question she was asking. It said, how do you motivate users to take these internal tests? So if you guys, John and Tan, if you have some extra ideas out there for what we can do for motivation, love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, motivation can be a little difficult. Like people are, when you catch them one-on-one, depending on what you're trying to do. If it's like a survey, there's you can get different avenues of getting their attention. Maybe it's posting to an intranet, maybe it's an email newsletter, maybe it's reaching out to groups of managers to get their subordinates to consider taking part in it. When you talk about later efforts like interviews and things of that nature, you'll be surprised to find that a lot of people just really want to have their say in something. They're very excited to take part in a discussion and and have a voice in what's going to be happening within their company. It's sort of those middle things where a little more effort is required than a survey, and it's not quite as personal as, say, an interview, like a card sort exercise or a tree test exercise. And this is where you're going to start to rely on some of the relationships you've built in the company to help get some willing participants to take part in it. And reach out to your internal communicators in your company, people that work for like corporate comms or a business unit communication team, or really anyone in comms in your entire company or marketing for that matter, to see if there's ways you can get the word out and drum up some willing participants. Because once people see the value of what you're trying to do, they're usually pretty eager to help.
Yeah, so absolutely, John. I agree. And just to kind of talk about the flip side of it, of course, you want to motivate the employees to participate in the study, but you also don't want to deter them from taking part in the study. And by that, I mean, there are certain circumstances where an employee might be reluctant to participate in the study because they don't feel comfortable providing their open and honest feedback to someone else within the company. So one way to kind of get around that is obviously to let them know that the responses are anonymous. It's not going to be tied to their name or anything like that, and let them know that the data that you're collecting is going to be used by the research team. It's not going to go into outside of this to the people outside of the scope of the study. And it also helps too if the person moderating or the person running the study is someone external from your company. It's always good to, if you have a study and you're afraid that your employees, aren't going to provide open and honest feedback to another employee within that company, then to just go ahead and use our professional services or someone else outside of your company to run that study.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Tan. That's definitely true. You want to make sure that you're going to want to record these sessions just so people know you're not, it's only going to be seen by the team that's working on the research. That, it's not like we're going to report you to your manager that you hate the application that you're using or that you're frustrated at your job. I think most people understand that after you have the conversation with them. They're not going to think you're out there trying to get them fired or anything. But you're right that, Tan, that there are plenty of people, especially people from across cultural lines that feel uncomfortable being critical. And just let them know, have that conversation with them. Let them know that you're not using their name. Tell them not to use their name in the conversation you're having. If they're uncomfortable sharing their webcam or whatever that is, that's fine too. But just let them know you're not going to be tying their name to the results of what they're doing. You're not going to be talking about them individually. It's just an aggregate really to improve the experience for them.
Thank you. Thank you both. That was several good answers back and forth. That was awesome. Looks like we have 2 questions now and about 4 minutes left. If someone wants to ask one more question, that'd be great. But as you get typing, I see Ben's question here is kind of more for me. Is the share the link section of the test that Ryan showed specific to the new download test or specific to bring your own recruit tests? Also, is no download testing available to all accounts now? I had heard about this but hadn't seen it yet. Ben, to answer your question, it is available now. It is the default for bring your own. So the share link that I showed works for everything. Where if you launch a panel test, you can still have that link. If you launch a BYOU test or bring your own test, you can use that link. And the default recorder now is the no download, just to make it super easy for the participants. We can also be moving things around and give that access to like a panel test or another test that you may want, because we do have that full capability in our platform now. And it's also the default for all moderated tests, whether they're panel tests or BYOU tests, it's always going to be no download. So yeah, if you have any more questions about that, happy to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. So it looks like Sandeep did just put in a question, but hopefully we can get to both of these real quick. Bob asked before the session today, how many testers should I use for an internal test? Would it be the same as an external test?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit of the internal tests most often is they're not as constrained by how many people you can potentially get. Only real constraint with your internal is how many people are in your company, I guess, or how many are relevant to the particular study you're running. With quant data, I think it's helpful to have as many within reason, as many as you can get. Maybe per study, you could aim for anywhere between 5 to 15. You may even want to do more for things like card sorts. They tend to have an upper range of maybe 40 or 50 individuals if you can get that many. And for live interviews, I mean, that's a bit more constrained just based on your time, right? Because you're going to be having those conversations with people and taking up the time from you or from a UX team if you have it. To be able to facilitate those conversations within the understanding of keeping it in business hours and working around people's meetings and schedules. So, I think overall that's a hard question to define in the solid number, but I don't think you can go wrong with including a healthy number, I'll say maybe 10, 15, 20 within each session. You can do less. I mean, if your constraints keep you to 5 or 10, that's totally fine too. You're gonna, in certain circumstances, you're gonna see a point of diminishing returns. You're not gonna see quite as many issues start to develop with, say, unmoderated task-based work when you get up to the very high numbers. But for certain quant areas, you might want more individuals. And I'll let Tan, I'm sure Tan has some thoughts on that too.
No, John, I think you pretty much nailed it. Yeah, I would say it really wouldn't be too different from testing externally. But with the benefit of testing internally is that you could probably get away with less or no incentives. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility in the having a larger sample size.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Looks like the last questions come in. I can probably just answer real quick. Sandeep asked, when Userlytics recruits testers, how do they guarantee that the testers are not participating only because the incentives motivate them to try and complete the sessions quickly, rushing through the tasks? An actual end user of the product being tested will relate to the product being tested and will behave without bias or vested interests, don't you think? Here at I can answer from the product side of things. Here at Userlytics, we have a panel of just under 1 million participants that we've been cultivating since 2009. And all of the participants in our panel have an internal rating, a rating from members of our operations team or our recruiters team, and they have an external rating. And the external ratings will be when our clients are actually sourcing these users and interacting with these users. Every time that a user goes through and does a test, they get a rating associated. And we can quickly see which are the performers that are doing well, they're very articulate, they're trying their best, they're providing good answers the entire time. And those that are maybe unfamiliar with what UX testing is for, or maybe they're more shy, or maybe just the results aren't as strong. For all the results, we give a little bit of feedback so that the next session can be better. And if we see a continued pattern of a participant just being shy or not giving the best results, or a worst case, rushing through the results, we slowly wean them off the platform to where they don't get invited to more tests, with the hope that the participants that we do invite are always going to be great quality. Adding on top of that, we also have a QA process. So whenever we source a participant from our panel, we actually go through and watch the test. So if a tester isn't talking, that result is rejected. Or a tester is rushing through all the tasks and completes everything in 3 minutes, that result is rejected. So that way, a bad result should never even make it to one of our clients' dashboards. And then if something does come through, it happens, especially in languages where we don't have the highest support, like maybe a really small Southeast Asian country. In those cases, we check the results, make sure it's okay, kind of from a technical standpoint, but something might slip through the cracks at that point. If that does, then that's where you have the rating scale that you have access to, and I just mentioned a minute ago. And if you rate the user 1 star, we replace the result for you. So with us rating all of these individuals, with us QAing every result, and with us giving you the ability to reject the tester and request a new one, all of those make it to where the results that are delivered by Userlytics are going to be the utmost quality.
And I'll add to that, Ryan, by saying, if you're seeing this kind of behavior in internal participants, that's pretty shocking. These are colleagues that you work with in the same company or in a sister company or a parent company for that matter, or a B2B company you have a relationship with. So if you have participants, racing through tests or not giving their best effort or just doing it for some sort of incentive, it's gonna be pretty obvious, and you can weed them out pretty quickly. I think it's a lot less likely in these internal settings because, it's not like a typical participant where maybe you don't really know who they are. It would be a little effort to try and figure out their real identity, which is true. But for the team that's working in the user experience aspect of things, they will have an understanding of who the person they're talking to is. So if they're not really taking it seriously or, looking to just rush through it, and it's obvious that they're not engaged, it's pretty easy just to stop the conversation or stop the efforts with that individual. And I'm not saying you need to punish them in any way or go tell their manager that they're being a bad sport or anything, but just, you wouldn't be using their material going forward. You'd be pretty aware early on that they're just not going to be helpful in your efforts.
Yeah, that's a good addition. Thank you, John. Especially for internal stuff. Yeah, I can definitely be monitoring them. That's awesome. I see we're a couple minutes past the hour and there's no questions in chat or the question section. So just want to give a shout out to Tan and John. Thank you for the session today. Thank you for giving us that amazing feedback. And to all of you who did stay to the end of the webinar with us, thank you for taking the time on your busy day to learn with us here. We hope that between the informative talk that John gave, the QA session that Tan and John were a part of, and a little walkthrough of our platform, you'll be able to upgrade your internal testing capabilities real quick. As mentioned before, I've said it a few times, we'll get this recording to everyone here. It might take a couple days for us to actually send it out, but I promise we will actually get it out to you guys. And if you have any questions in the meantime, just send an email, as I mentioned about 10 minutes ago, to ux@userlytics.com, and we'll be happy to help out. So thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.